Okay, hello. Good morning, everybody. Um, little blurb before we begin. This art stream today is basically sort of a lore stream as well. From my own head, i.e., I've made this lore through decades of consuming stories and what have you. Right now, I'm just cleaning up some of the final aspects. Okay, I guess good afternoon to you, teething void. I'm cleaning up some of the basically presentation materials so that when I do actually get into the lore of it, I have visuals to entertain you guys with. Um, Specifically, this is a fantastical world that I have been building for almost a decade now. Perhaps a little bit less, perhaps a little bit more. I don't know. I don't care about time. Time is just a construct. And hence why it's the morning and the afternoon. Let's see. Got like 2 more pages to clean up, and then we can start. Mostly simple stuff. Mainly, this is art from a while ago that I'm using as placeholders or because it still suits the aspects that I wanted. But this is back from when I liked to cram everything into one page. So I'm trying to clean up a little bit of the white space so that you guys don't have to be dealing with random sudden flash glare of pure white paper. So, as stated, the world's name is Etterwill. It didn't actually start with a name. That has been a recent development. And I feel like it's good enough to start now. So, we're going to go to the gameplay. Oop. Don't look at that. It's not ready yet. The world is Etterwill. This is basically the only continent on it because the planetoid itself that we're on with this should not have been able to contain life. We're going to go over the gods, we're going to go over the regions, and we're going to go over the people specifically in this chat. But we're going to start with the gods. And to do that, I'm going to make a little spot for story. Because I do have a story. And it starts fairly simply with a rock out in space. This rock does not have any life on it. This rock is close enough to a sun that it could, but it cooled down far too fast, and therefore does not have the molten core needed to sustain life. Sad. Got a nice sun over here. That is, it has to deal with space debris, it has to deal with all of that because it does not have a magnetic field. That changes because I am very much into both the sci-fi and the fantasy aspects of things. That changes when it gets hit by a seed. Magic seed, of course, but still seed all the same. Seed hits the planet. And buries into it. Deep enough that it definitely caused a massive impact and a lot of change. Buried itself in. And as I said, it's a magic seed. Or as it should probably be referred to in its first aspect of gods from Edorwill, it's life. That's what this tree gave to the planet. Because it wasn't the only thing that started growing. And it did grow quite a lot. Basically, it grew until the whole planet was green, and the tree itself was big enough and twisted enough, gnarled enough, that it could do something else. Which was basically to spit out the first of the other gods that would come to live and create cultures here on Edorwill. The first of those gods was Oma. Oma, while old now, is actually young when she emerges from the tree. She's a little curious kid and wants to see the whole world. And so she goes around the whole planet. But she came out from inside the tree. The tree made life that was not just the plant life. So Oma wanders around the whole planet, sees everything, that the planet has to offer, and comes back to the tree. The tree has done something that she has never seen before. And note that this tree right now has caused a lot of changes on the planet, not only creating craters and massive amounts of basically everything you can think of. It's created fissures, but it has not created any water. It's just plant life. And that's important, and I'll explain why in a second. But Oma comes back to the tree to see that the tree has done something she's never seen before, basically. And that is, it has flowered. You'll see I'm doing this flower of many colors because that's exactly what it was. It was a flower that shined all of the colors in the world. And on top of that, it also... let me finish this first before I try and continue. So it's flowered. And it also made a fruit. I like peaches, so it was basically a peach equivalent. It's a pitted fruit of some variety, and the fact that it has a pit is important, so do not forget that it has a pit. So Oma comes back to this, basically. And, well, she's never experienced hunger because it's a god. She's a god. But something instinctively is telling her, that's good eating. We're going to cut that down. So she cuts it down off of the tree. Mostly she breaks it off with her hands because Oma is strong. So she cuts the fruit down. But she's still up in the tree. So she goes over here to this flower. The tree basically is helping her this whole time to move her, to give her places to stand. It's very easy for her to climb this tree. It's like immensely big. And she goes over to this flower. This flower then blooms. And thus is the second god born from the tree. That would be Tayasa, who is a dragon centaur being, and from that there's a major change because Tayasa is twofold. She is both the sun god equivalent and also the god of creativity, as seen by the fact that she was born from a flower with all of the colors in the world on it. Now, Tayasa and Oma, who is older and wiser than her, acts as a parent, in a sense, and they drag. Give me 1 second. They drag this peach together onto a mountain with a divot in it so that it doesn't roll away. It's basically just a mountain with a divot in it, at least at the time. Things will change as time goes by. And time is going by. Not that anybody realizes it at the time of this, since there's only 2 people who are really conscious, and a tree that seems to be content making gods. So they drag this peach over here, right? And they start to eat it. Nom nom. Nom nom nom. Now, Tayasa's a little kid. And a messy eater. So they eat it down to the pit, but there are pieces that have been flung off. And there's a pit here. Except while they were eating it, they must have cracked it a little bit. And from that crack, we start getting water. At first they thought maybe it was fruit juice. But the water didn't stop once they finished eating the fruit. In fact, it kept flowing and flowing and flowing out of this pit. But it only had a little bit of a time because it was only a crack. So basically, from there, what they decided to do was they were going to break it open. Because what else do you do with a strange thing, right? So indeed, they broke it open. And one part of it was enough to form a sort of boat. The top part of it broke into pieces. But when they did that, suppose they should have expected what happened next, but the divot in the mountain filled up with water, started overflowing down the sides, and started forming rivers from this central mountain location. This would not stop until all of the oceans and rivers and lakes and divots on the planet had been filled up. So now we have greenery and water. And Oma and Tayasa, I'm just going to use centralific colors over here. They're just standing over here going, "What? What just happened? I don't understand." And this is this little boat right here. Somebody sits up in it. This is the third god, Sirandri, known as the moon goddess, the goddess of water, and usually for being a tiny little sprite fairy. She's also the giver of willpower and is the basis of, and willpower equals sort of the basis of magic for people here. You have to have a lot of willpower in order to bend mana. The tree has a lot of willpower because it can create new life out of simply its own mana. So now there are 3 gods here in the world. And that's impressive, because originally there was only them and the tree. Now, these pieces of fruit, they don't come into play for a while, but what you need to remember about them is that they're fruit from the tree. So it doesn't necessarily rot or go bad. So, Sirandri, Tayasa, and Oma basically start living in this world, full of only plant life and water and the tree and them. Sirandri is the last child god to ever exist. And by that I mean these 3 are the only ones that experienced growing up. In theory, they went from a child to a teenager to an adult to wherever they felt like they needed to stop. For Oma, as you can see, she wanted to be powerful and wise. For Sirandri, well, her shape is fluid because she is a water goddess. It seems she stopped probably at prime age. Same with Tayasa. So they did the whole childhood thing. They're the only gods that did. But it does mean that Sirandri and Tayasa and Oma all went through the difficulties of being a kid. i.e., they dealt with losing their teeth. They dealt with, in Sirandri and Tyasa's case, possibly shedding scales or feathers, or losing their claws and growing new ones in. So, theoretically, what do you think they would do with those pieces, right? They did what they thought was best. They gave it back to the tree, which by this point was still growing and had grown to be tall enough that if they were able to go to space, they would be able to see it from space. They don't have an orbiting moon, they just have Sirandri. So they take it to the tree and they bury it in the roots. By the roots, in the dirt down there with the tree. They gave it back. Like, that's what you should do, right? This tree is where we came from. This tree is what we should give back to, right? That's how it works. We should just do that. So they did. And the tree had run out of ideas, basically. If we're being honest, it had come up with 3 really cool people, and it didn't want to make any more children, as it were, because they wanted to start progressing the planet. So it used the leftovers, i.e., the teeth, the claws, the feathers, to create a chimera. A chimera with human level intelligence, Tinatin. You'll notice that there's lore here that I'm not going to explain yet. This is Tinatin. He is a chimera god built off of bits and bobs, and he made his way out from under the roots of the tree all the way over here to the river, where he sat down and he saw himself in the water. And he went, I look pretty cool. I want to make something that looks like me. And he started playing with the clay that is on the riverbanks. Nobody noticed this at first, necessarily. He's kind of a dude, and they were not really aware that another god had been born. But eventually, Tyasa sees him on one of her solar fly-throughs and comes down and says hello. Asks him what he's doing. And he said, I'm making stuff that looks like me, but it's not really working the way I want it to. Tyasa is the god of creativity. And so they start making stuff together. Tinatin had created quite a few little sculptures, and these went on to be animals. Technically the first few, and mostly one-offs. Things like the unicorn, or dragons, or things that they might tweak later together. But unknowingly, he had breathed life into them. So, when they disappeared from his collection of little blobs of earth, he didn't think much of it because he didn't realize that he had brought them to life. So now we've got animals out here in the world. And two of his one off creations that are more chimeric than simply one thing or another, came to. They were basically siblings. And the first one resembles a Kirin in superficial ways. It looked sort of like a deer with a singular horn, but it had tiger stripes and a long tail, and it was had some reptilian aspects and fangs. It was cat-like as well as equine-like. Raced its sibling. Now, what its sibling looked like is lost to history, and you'll figure out why in a second. But he came across the bigger piece of what was left over of basically what I'm going to call the moon peach, and eats it all because it smells really good. But by doing that, it ingested part of the tree's mana, specifically the tree's mana that was used to create a god. And in doing so, evolved itself into a god. That's Mappin. He evolved himself into a god through eating leftover food. He, however, did not account for the fact that he didn't know what aspect of godhood he would have. He got curiosity. And upon receiving that, ran with all the speed and power he could muster through the world, seeing everything, watching the seasons change, seeing the same place over and over and over and over and over again, to watch something moving in a way that was interesting, and had forgotten that he had been in a game with his sister. His sister, slow moving and plodding though she was, came across where he had obtained godhood and found the last little bit of leftover moon peach. It did not evolve her as far as her brother. She did not become anthropomorphic, more humanoid. No. Basically, what happened is it evolved her mind. And so she began to think about the fact that she was incidentally in a place of danger. As a slower moving, more animalistic looking being, people would not necessarily take kindly to her, and she thought that through, and she thought maybe I could scare them. And so she started hiding her form with leaves, big leaves that she found. And just like with Tinatin and Tayasa, as she moved to try and intercept her brother, who was still in the curiosity state of, I have to understand everything and everyone all at the same time, met Sirandri. Met Sirandri and knew that she would need her to help be able to catch her brother. And so she asked for Sarandri's help because she herself was so slow moving that she couldn't set up puzzles, tricks, interesting things to catch her brother's attention and make him curious to drag him through there. And she made her way slowly, but steadily through the desert. Each night, Sarandri would stop near her and they would discuss something else that they wanted to do. And this formed the oases within the desert. She would eventually reach this peninsula. I'm not getting it to work with me. Come on, I want to show off this peninsula. Move. This peninsula down here, where you'll see each of the oases marked. But she makes it down to this peninsula where her brother has been basically told something interesting is waiting. Her brother gets there and she's covered in sand, basically, hidden underneath the sand. She pops up and she catches him. This is the goddess Nimat, the goddess of mysteries, puzzles, tricks. This was the oldest design. This is the newest design. This is the newest design, the one in black and white. But she catches her brother. Now I'm going to point out a design element on him that I don't know if anybody noticed because I did it so fast. She catches her brother, but her brother hasn't been stopping. Her brother hasn't stopped in a while, in fact. And that might not have been good for him in the long run. And so she catches him and his legs, both of them from the knees down, disintegrate, basically. He loses both of his legs, which isn't a very good thing. In that happening, the gods that were involved in this particular incident, so Mappin, Nimat, and Sarandri, all panic. They all panic and they drag him as fast as they can, mostly using Sarandri, who calls in her sister, Tayasa, for help, to drag him to the tree. Over here. This tree. Where he's orange. That's his color. Where they basically ask the tree, hey, could you help us? He lost his legs? What are we supposed to do about that? And the tree goes, oh, that's an easy fix. And makes him essentially limbs out of its own limbs. Gives him second chance to walk around. Basically now the family is overprotective of him because, dude, you can't just run around all the time and just expect to be okay. That's not cool. That's not helpful. Stop. Okay. And that's basically, as far as anybody knows, the last of the gods. However, there was one other. I don't actually have a drawing of them because they're more recent than anything else. Essentially, they came up from the roots of the great tree. And are its counterpart in essence. It itself is made up of basically the heliolisk, or rather, one ring shows the phases of the moon, the other is simply the sun. It exists as the counterpoint entity. It's the entity of endings. It's the god of end. The god of ends. And not many people really are aware about it, or really invoke its name, or its aspect in any general sense. But it does have precedent. It does have not precedent, importance. It needs to be mentioned. It does exist. I just haven't really decided on a finalized name for it other than its aspect, and it's minorly problematic, but not really so much. So basically, by the end of all of the gods, humankind was starting to become a thing, mostly around the bottom of the tree, which is up here. This is the Peach Mountain. As you can probably tell from the vast amount of rivers that come off of this. But we're going to go through now some of the important, I guess, regions. Regions is a good version of this. It's hard. It's hard to really explain this. So we're going to go and we're going to start talking about major lands and major landscapes that are important here. We're going to start with the biggest place, and that is GFD, down here. Now, I'll explain what that means here in a second, but this is a mountain range. I didn't add any mountain ranges to it, but considering what this is, it has to be a mountain range. This is water. So it's basically a giant cliffside mountain range. As I said before, lore in my world is a little bit weird, and you're going to get some interesting things out of it. Nemat's realm is this location. This is all hers. She obtained it, it's hers. And there's a secondary reason for that. Nemat is one of the few gods that is aware of the god of endings who lives over here and isn't afraid of him. Puzzles have an end. Mysteries have an end. Why not? They're close enough, it doesn't matter. This is the Ghost Flame Desert. And the Ghost Flame Desert, its capital, which is right here, is a city of glass. They make and manufacture glass bells to give to caravanners who hop from oasis to oasis to oasis. This one isn't really a feasible route. People still take it, but it's not very feasible. This is the Ghost Flame Desert. Their capital and most of their cities have some aspect of glass involved. Specifically, usually blue glass. And they manufacture. Let me show you one of the things that they manufacture. With their immense glass blowing skills. They mostly manufacture little bells like this. Now, I know why. Why would they manufacture little bells like that? That's the only way to keep the ghosts from the desert from attacking your caravan. And yes, I do mean that literally. There are ghosts in this desert. This whole desert is haunted. It's haunted. Specifically, it's haunted by your memories and people who have died in it. So, the best way to, if you're feeling sad that you can no longer see a loved one, is to go alone into a small part of the Ghost Flame Desert and have a final conversation with them if they want to show up and talk to you. A lot of times, they don't. If they don't, the most common superstition is that they have moved on and are at peace. Therefore, you should probably forgive yourself rather than relying on somebody else's forgiveness. The Ghost Flame Desert people are also excellent therapists. The Nemayans, specifically. They named themselves after their god, and they're masters of puzzle solving, weaving, and glasswork. That's the Ghost Flame Desert. I'm going to make a little bubble around it so that you can see its whole range. That's the Ghost Flame Desert. These are mountains. And this is ocean. Now, I have a run for the God of Endings, but it's mostly around this and a little up here. He doesn't have too big of a reputation area. Most people don't really worship him. Most people aren't really aware of it. These are the people that do. We got basically mountain cliff sides. We got hills. It's a pretty fairly good small scape. The people that do end up worshipping or following my unnamed as of yet god of death are interesting because I did not realize it was going to be them until I did, basically. Because all of them have different people. They're all humans. They all can crossbreed. They're all people. But they have very distinct and different looks. And I'll explain to you those as well. But we're going to start with this. There are a few devout people, priests, priestesses, I guess you could call them, that follow the god of end, the god of endings, death, basically. And they aren't after death. They're not seeking to push it forward. In fact, they're trying to prevent people from showing up in the Ghost Flame Desert. How do they do that? They do that through basically Make a Wish, except far more generally impossible and weirdly difficult. They call themselves the wish dealers, basically. And what they do is they go around and they speak on behalf of the god of death, and they ask you what it is that you regret the most, what it is that you would like to change, what they could do to help. And they offer to grant your wish. Now, theirs is the loosest lore that I have at the moment, but that's basically the lore for them. Now, we're going to switch colors again to a nice teal. Because now we're going to basically expound on water. There is an overlap between 3 countries for this one city. But basically, this is the range for Sirandri. People who worship Sirandri, people who deal with Sirandri, people who pray. If we're being honest, it also follows down the rivers. But I'm not going to go down each and every river. But I'm also going to show you that it's very prevalent to be a dual worshipper in the Ghost Flame Desert, with Sirandri being the secondary choice most often. Sirandri is basically the Ghost Flame Desert's second favorite god. Why? Because everybody loves oases. They keep us alive. Now, with them specifically, they mostly live on boats, on the rivers, and on the lakes. They're fishers. They are master magicians. Between these two, there's a small level of rivalry for who's the best magic users. And it can go either way, because not everybody in here is a wish dealer, and not everyone over here is as good as magic as they could be. But it's usually these ones just because their population's slightly bigger. Now, that's Sirandri. Like I said, Mappin. These islands are home to Mappins. People, for the most part. They like to travel. They're not nearly as good at it as you'll see from another one. They got some claim to this city as well. And they basically everywhere that people live, you'll find people who worship Mappin. Mappin is the god of travel, the god of trades, the traveler's friend. He's basically a Hermes equivalent, but less Hermes than other messenger gods. He's not necessarily even a messenger, he's just a traveler. He likes traveling, he's a very personable person. But yes, that's Mappin's range. If we're being honest, there is some worship of the tree, but it's mostly around where the tree is. Everywhere else around that usually follow Oma's teachings, including the people in the tree, and some in here on the caldera. However, that's mostly in relation to her being the quote unquote mother of Surandri. These guys, no rivalry as far as anyone can tell. They're just sort of friendly to each other. Because the end of all things just means the start of another. Now, these guys, you'll notice that I didn't put an orange dot here. And I will explain why here in a second, but we're going to start with Tinatin. Tinatin, whose color, for me, is a purple. This is the range of people who worship Tinatin. Fairly small compared to the other gods, yes. But that is because of this thing right here, which is often called the wound. You'll notice that this little island is not claimed. It's because this edge right here is sheer cliffs, which only starts coming down around here into a nice bay area, which isn't their territory. Think Mongols and barbarians and the Vikings when you think of Vengarians, because this is Vangaran, the home of those who worship Tinatin. They've often pushed in and around Surandri territory, but have never really been able to hold any of it, mainly because magic wielders are hard to deal with. And these guys, while sort of magical, aren't the same type of magical. I'm going to show you what each of the races look like, with one major exception being the tree doesn't necessarily have a race associated with it. And only some of them have extremely differing races. But now we're on to Jahara. Now, you are my friend. You've probably heard me saying this a lot. Jahara is the first country that I came up with for this world, in essence. Its borders have remained largely unchanged for thousands of years. This little divot right here technically belongs to them, but, and I will explain this through very simple means. Jaharans, are everywhere except for their home. And that's because of the Jaharan Vangaran War, which I will explain a little bit later. These two were the first countries that I came up with. Mine and their enemy. Initially, it was going to be a one story type of thing for a character that I had come up with a long time ago. This did not end up being the case. So we're going to start by basically turning on all the gods again. Well, I guess we'll start one at a time. And placing them over their respective regions. Because I think that's fun. This dude's a little bit of everywhere, mappin'. However, he lives there. His sister is next door. The god of sun and creativity is over here. I'm just going to point it out while I'm doing this. You'll notice that the before photo and the now photo have a distinct difference. And that distinct difference is also reflected in the canyon. Initially, it was supposed to be the same shape. Basically, the wound hit him as much as his land. We've got Oma. And Sarandri. And you. So we've got basically all of this down. I don't necessarily mind this being looking like this. So now I'm going to start showing you some of the stuff that's important. And by that, I do mean the stuff that's important. See you. Takes a second. So, this first set right here is the city of Wendenvine. The city of Wendenvine is inhabited by these elfin people. And Wendenvine, specifically, is the capital city of the Caldera, which is here. So these are the people these are the people who live on the waterways and are worshippers of Sirandri, specifically. This is what they look like. This is what their cities look like. And this is specifically the Caldera. They've built city terraces, tresses, that the rich boat owners Shh. Shh. It's not a Pokemon Center or a shop. But the temple that exists up at the top specifically is for Sirandri. This temple up here, temple, is often water shows and things of that nature. They themselves are basically, they're elves. They're just elves. They're fancy elves. You know what you understand, right? You understand. They're fancy elves. Minyans exist in the Ghost Flame Desert, and they look like lizard people. I don't know, Fairy. You never told me if they were short or not. Basically, when I was building some of these locations, I relied on my family members to give me any interesting ideas about them. And my sister is basically the basis for the inspo for Sirandri. Just as Jahara is mine, Wendenvine is hers. The Minyans of the Ghost Flame Desert look like this. They don't care about gender, they don't care about presentation. They exist as weird lizard folk because that's the best way to survive in the desert. This is still one of my favorite outfit decisions. Shows what gender fluid people or people who are bi gender are just like, yep, I look like this. They wear a lot of layers in mimicry of their beloved deity. They live down here in all of these little oases. But they also are the Ghostbusters, basically. They're Ghostbusters. This is Kanira. Kanhira. And one of my original bases for the story was perhaps I will collect a hero from each type of region and build a super party out of that. But I never managed to care about the rest of them like I cared about the first couple. Kanira was one of the first couple. It was her, a dude from Wendenvine, and Jahara, one of my dudes from Jahara, specifically the dude from Jahara. This is Kanira. She is a prime example of Vengarian beauty and in Vengarian fashion. There is another, I think. No. Not that one. Let me see if I can find it. Nope, that one's the same one again. Goodness. Pull this one in. Showing more Wendenvinians in their more accurate art style, including age ranges and how they look older, but we'll get back to that. Can I find more about No. Okay. So it's just going to be in here where you see this again. Edorwil, hero of Jahara from my older art, hero of Wendenvine, and Kanira again. You'll notice that she's still got the very distinct eye makeup. That is part of their culture. It is as much telling you what tribe they're from as also telling you what their mana animal is. Basically, their spirit animal, basically the animal that they were born as a representation of. These people worship Tinatin, the god of animals. So it only stands to reason that they themselves have animals within them. Khaneera is and has always been to me an animal that most people wouldn't think of as dangerous, but she's not the only one that I have. I forgot. I have one other Vangarian. And that's Laupri, which is him. An exceptionally devout follower of Tinatin, whose spirit animal is a wolf. That is what he is on the inside, but he isn't necessarily a wild wolf anymore. In a sense, he's very domesticated, and you can see, once again, very distinct makeup. Instead of red like Khaneera's, his is brown. He's also blind in one eye, and that eye sees animal spirits. It's a blessing from his deity. Basically, in combat, Vangarians can summon the reflection of their soul to help them in combat, but they're very much physical attackers and not ranged attack, not actually casting, which is why they can take some area, but they can never hold it for long because Wendenvine tends to push them back fairly easily. Speaking of, we did that. So let's look at Wendenvinians again. They're very sprightly. In all honesty, they remind me a lot of like the Kokiri from Legend of Zelda. A little bit like the Hylians, but in their own way, they're more like they're more like they're wet elves, basically. But it's obvious that they value well-made items, that they care about looking interesting. Honestly, they got pirates and people who are obviously like dangerous entities. Now, I'm going to explain Jahara. Since. Okay, no, I can explain the wish dealers first. Wish dealers are harder. Let me explain. This is an excellent one. I just don't need those parts. This is Blitzy. She's a wish dealer. Wish dealers are, in essence, entities that are affected more by the sun and the moon's cycle than most anybody else. Let's see. I have a stuffed animal of her because I made her before I realized she was a part of this particular story. Basically, horns, ears, tail, usually with a split in it. But everything after that is human, except for the fact that most of what they look like, depending on when they were born, and often this is what determines whether or not you can be a wish dealer, is covered in a fine layer of protection. Basically, you could hit Blitzy with a sword in 2 places. Your sword doesn't do any damage on this one. Your sword cuts only her face on this one, making them very hard to kill and making it so that people who are thinking that they bring death with them is they're protected against it. Usually they have a partner who has a reflected image. So for Blitzy, she's got a heart on her front, and she's got a friend who has his whole back exposed, basically. And so while they can't get any tattoos or anything, because nothing sticks to them, they can defend each other by blocking each other's weak spots. Wish dealers often come in 2s. And while this isn't necessarily the best picture of her, it's still a good representation. Depending on when you were born in the lunar cycle, you can have more black or less black. If you were born during eclipses, you could have stripes in your black that turn white, which would make you more vulnerable in those locations, even if they're not skin tone, if they're not this grayish black, which that is, it's grayish black, then you're in danger of basically becoming wounded. As for the person who's yelling at me to show the plush, I would. I really would, but it's so far away and I don't want to get up for it right now. Now, because that works for me all the times. I guess I'll show you guys the plush now. Sorry. Keep doing the gallery. This is the plushie. This is Blitzy in her fancy little outfit. You can tell. Forked tail, little horns, dark ears. But she's also got the belly. I'm not going to take her dress off, but you can see she's got the skin tone there. But for people who were wondering, this is her color scheme. My sister made that for me, and I love her dearly. With that, I will also... I do have a plush for the other person here, but as before, I am not in a place to grab it, unfortunately. But, yes. Sahyam Jahara, this guy, he's the first person that I ever drew for this situation. If I had to explain it, I found there's a whole lot with him and his personal story, but that's not even the best picture of him. there is a lot of art for him because I care about him quite a lot because he's my boy. He's my most important boy. He's the king boy. And I got a plushie of him too. He was the first actually that I got a plushie of. Again, from my sister. Let's see if Blitzy's still here, but this is Sahyom Jahara. He's got his braids and his tattoos, and he initially came about from me thinking that it would be interesting to join a well, a group on DeviantArt was doing basically an alternate universe where we, the artists, were gods of our creations. And I came across it basically when it was dying. And I took one look at it and went, I want to do that. At the time, all the art that I saw there depicted people having subordinates, people that they had picked up, that they chose to follow them, creations that they had made to act as emissaries and help lessen their workload. And I designed two of them. Two of them. And of those two, I had thought that it would be fun to do one from the past and one from the future. And by future, I meant present. And only one of them survived, and it was the one from the past, Sahyom Jahara. Of course, I did not know what the heck Jahara was. I didn't know what Sahi had done. I didn't know anything. And then I started thinking about it. Sahyom Jahara is a long story. His whole it's not really a long story, it's just sort of interestingly personal because the character is basically my baby. He's important to me, but I'm going to explain the story that I have so far, which basically takes place during the time frame known as the Jaharan Van Grand War. Basically, tensions were rising over here as a Khan king began spreading a terrible falsehood amongst his people, basically claiming that those with prey animals as their spirit animals were to be subjugated by those with predatory animals because predatory animals were powerful and mighty and strong, and this was causing pain to Tinatin anyway. But they looked down on Jahara because Jahara is a craftsman's paradise. There are thousands of master craftsmen. They pass down their craft. They don't care who you are, so long as you have a passion for the arts. Their goddess, where she lands, the world becomes brighter and more colorful. They sing and dance, and while they do participate in practicing the art of war, which they do, there are warriors, they looked at us and they saw frivolous craftspeople, basically. Vangarians looked at Jaharans and saw frivolous craftspeople. People who would be easy pickings, basically. And so they amassed an army and they attacked. They specifically gunned for the capital city of Jahara, where the king, his husband, and his wife were all residing. Polyamory, man. I don't know why, but that's the truth for them. Sahi was the second son, technically. Basically, they fought back against the army that had been brought to bear. So we had a big border clash going on where lots of people were suffering. And then Sahi's older sister, who had gone to the temple because she didn't want to rule, because she would have been the next ruler, got a vision from the goddess that said that she had fashioned a weapon to help end the war faster, and that all we needed to do was find it. All Jahara needed to do was find it. And being the well-traveled trades and craftspeople that they were, they immediately set out all over Edorwil, searching to try and find said weapon that would save them, that would bring an end to the war. It never occurred to them that it might be within their own borders. Eventually people stopped looking because they needed the manpower to fight this war that was happening. And the only one who was still going out was Sahi. As the second prince, he thought it was his duty to help find this artifact that obviously the royal family had been given a vision about. This was his job to find it. And he did. He did. After going out on one of his long treks, he found it in a thicket in the woods at Sandriel. The Black Star Axe. Now, there's a couple of things you gotta be aware of with Sandriel. One, a god made it. And two, a god only made this part and wrapped the bottom. The rest of this, the wooden heft of the axe, came from the tree. And as I told you throughout the beginning about the story of the birth of the gods, that can bestow divinity on people. So he finds the axe, and he's making his way back to the capital when he basically comes across a ridge where he normally stands to see his city, and he finds it burning. They had been overwhelmed, and the city was being destroyed. People were fleeing in their carts with as much of their craftsman knowledge as they could muster. Any way that they could get out, they were taking it. And in essence, there's a lot of bad feelings going on. Sahi feels betrayed. Tayasa feels like she failed her people. Tinatin is like distressed that his people would do such a thing. The other gods are freaking out because if a people gets wiped out, even if they had been born from the tree, does that mean that they too would be wiped from existence because they get mana and life from the people? What's going on, right? And we get a berserker, basically. Sahiom goes and drives back the army, basically single-handedly using the mana that he has and the weapon created by a god who he feels betrayed by and doesn't necessarily know if he wants to continue associating with, depending on who's telling the story. It can be rather sad. This does get passed down as legend lore, but nobody ever really asks him. So he drives them back, and basically the king somewhere over here, he's down here wiping out the army. The king says, even if you defeat us now, it's not going to bring anybody back. We've already won. You should just give up and give up your land that's so lush with life and fruit and give it to us anyway. And, or something along those lines. I don't actually know the dialogue. And Sahyom takes the axe and slams it into the ground of Vangran and creates a crevice. A crevice that goes really, really, really deep. And basically, almost 95% of the believers of might makes right, predators are better than prey, the king's men get dropped into that gorge with no warning and, fall damage. This also, in essence, breaks Tin Atin's heart. And while he's still, in essence, I think he still has these little wings. I haven't redesigned him in a while. He might even still have this one big wing. He gets a wound that takes away his ability to fly. Out of heartbreak for both his people and for the grief that he caused Jahara. Sahi then basically continues to help people evacuate Jahara. Forgot. This over here is also Jaharan. And basically everybody disperses to find their own pathways and basically recover from this terrible war. There is one exception to Sahi's murderous rampage, and that is Laupri, who was there as a true believer of Tin Atin, not the belief system that the king was touting, and who, through action, rescued the child of a blacksmith artisan in Jahara and brought it basically to where it would be safe in the crater where he raised it as his own. The land of Jahara was then shrouded in fog. Only people who knew where it was could get back to it, as it were. And it went forgotten or lost to history for a while. Sahi expected to die of old age, basically. But he didn't. He didn't even age past his prime anymore. He didn't know what was going on. He was angry, and he went on a lot of talks with both Laupri, checking up on the Jaharan in Vangran because he didn't trust Vangran or any Vangarian person really anymore. But he also traveled the world, talked with different gods, realized that the gods themselves were far more like people than they were like high entities that had omniscient knowledge over all things. And slowly became able to forgive the goddess that he was born worshipping, that he spent his first half of life, I suppose, or first incident, his true mortal life worshipping. He then realized as he was traveling that a lot of the caravans no longer remembered her name. And basically, he realized what was going on, that she felt so guilty that she was not paying attention to her worshippers or her followers, and so they had started to forget her. What was surprising and off-putting for him is that he had been taking care of them, and so they had started to worship a small mytho figure that they called the storyteller. You saw that aspect of Sahi. It's this one, where he asks to join your fire. He doesn't have anything else to bring except a story, if you're okay with listening to him tell one. He tells stories that have been forgotten to modern Jaharans, and most people travel in caravans now, hoping one day that Jahara will be found so that they can return to their homeland, or at least that's what they'll tell you. Because a lot of people don't actually want them to leave because they're excellent craftspeople. But like I said, he gets back to Jahara because he can remember where Jahara is. He was born there. He knows where it is. Instinctively, almost. And he finds the goddess and they have a talk. And it's emotionally fraught. And he says that he's sorry for blaming her when she was trying to make it easier and they didn't think things through. And she says that she's sorry that she never made it clearer because she could have, and you know, a lot of I'm sorry, no, I'm sorry. And he says you should go back and get your worshippers again because that's important. And she goes, okay, but I don't think I should be just their god alone anymore. And this is how he basically becomes a minor god through a dealing. He's basically her angel. He doesn't necessarily have wings, but he does become more like an emissary of her will, helps her make sure that things are clear when she's talking to people. She doesn't do it much anymore, but I did forget. I totally forgot. And you guys have my sincerest apologies. I forgot to show you what the people who worship Mappin look like. Yeah, they're Kenomimis. They're animal people with patterns that are genetic. In the case of Altorius Almira Vandalum, which is his full name, he's a rabbit with star patterns from his mother, who is a deer woman. His sister is a jackalope. He is in line to become king. There's a whole school for ruling, so he ends up teaching there for a little bit because the man is as nomadic as his people are. Basically, what we're doing still here, why Jahara is still not cleaned up, is because she's trying her very best. Tayasa is trying her very best to give everybody a proper funeral, and it's hard when people are just bones. And she's still trying to clean up and clear up the mess that happened. And Tinatin actually does come and help because there are some Vangorans still there and he feels bad. But once Jahara is cleaned up, then they'll remove the fog that blankets the entire jungle down there because it is a jungle. And yeah, that's Etterwill. That's my thoughtscape universe that has been percolating for decade or less or more. Doesn't matter. At least a decade, I think, though. And the gods and lore around it. There's still work to be done here. There's still interesting things to be told. I mean, there's the fact that Sahi goes to the Ghost Flame Desert a lot of the time to talk to people who are centuries dead, and that he's got a glass jar that he keeps Ghost Flame Desert sand in that can be burned to give an apparition time to be. If it's burned with mana, it can give an apparition solid form, and he uses that to help teach his students down here. Down here in Devori. This world means a lot to me, and it's something that I'm working on adding more to a little bit at a time. Like, I know I want to cover a little bit of what Laupri felt during his time and how he helped save a forgotten art, or an art that would have been lost in blacksmithing because each of the tradespeople of Jahara had their own way of doing things. You could learn from multiple craftspeople, but your history is basically told on your skin in Jahara, where you're born, what you're learning, who you're from. And there's a symbol, this like half sun symbol, half moon symbol, is the symbol of kings, basically. If we're going to be like fancy with it, it's just the symbol that represents that you're allowed to learn and apprentice how to rule, the art of ruling is just as important as any other art. They train all of their arts equally. It's interesting. There's minor lore hidden just about everywhere that I haven't necessarily like expounded upon. But this is my little universe, my little corner of the universe that makes me very happy to share with you guys. So I think I'm going to call it here. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for listening to me talk about something that matters to me. Thank you for just being here and being you. If you like what I do and want to support me, I have a Ko-fi. If you have missed a stream and it's no longer in my Twitch highlights, I have a YouTube channel also linked in the description that is all my streams except for like the first 3 archived for YouTube. If you give to my Ko-fi, the goal right now is to help me buy a better laptop for streaming so that I could maybe play Minecraft or something. and that you guys could watch me play Minecraft from the very beginning because I don't know how to play Minecraft. Never played ever. I hope you all have a great day. If you enjoy what I do, maybe think of following me. I got a little goal at the bottom, like you can see. Have an excellent rest of your week. Have a great Thursday or wherever you are. And I'll see you next time. Bye bye.